Best way to catch your prey is to set a trap. That's what the US DEA does to catch one of the underworld's biggest arms traffickers. To lay the bait, they don't turn to a spy, but a retired bush pilot.
In the early 2000s, US intelligence analysts start to notice a very worrying trend. Insurgent groups and militias around the world suddenly have way more advanced weapons. For the US, this is a massive problem because a lot of these groups are openly hostile to Western interests.
US intelligence services want to find out where the weapons are coming from and cut the flow off at the source.
It's revealed that many of these weapons are Soviet issue. Illegal traffickers are funneling stockpiles of ex-Soviet arms into rebel hands, making big money.
By tracking shipments and speaking to informants, it becomes clear that the king of these traffickers is one man, Victor Bout, better known by his nickname, the Merchant of Death.
Bout is a former Soviet military officer. He's running a fleet of about 60 aircraft, and he's selling everything from assault rifles to helicopter gunships.
In 2002, Interpol releases a red notice for Bout, and he becomes a wanted man. Problem is, he's got friends in very high places.
Bout rarely leaves Russia, where he's widely believed to be protected by Moscow. When he does travel, he only goes to other rogue regimes that won't extradite him.
In 2007, the DEA decides enough is enough. To up the ante, they'll lure Bout into a trap.
The DEA comes up with a plan. They're gonna pose as buyers, offering him a multi-million-dollar weapons deal. But to seal it, they're gonna insist that he has to leave Russia. That way, they can grab him.
They name their plan Operation Relentless. For it to work at all, they need just the right frontman to place the bait.
This person needs to be of Bout's world, but also someone the DEA trusts.
There's only one guy who ticks both boxes, Mike Snow, a British pilot working out of South Africa.
Mike Snow is a former commando who has spent over a decade flying bush planes across Africa. He's no gun runner, but Snow has spent years touching down on the same runways that Bout flies into.
He has met many of Bout's cohorts, so they know him, they know of him, and they trust him.
The DEA reaches out to Snow and asks him to help.
Snow is initially reluctant, but he's seen what Bout's weapons can do, the way that they destroy communities and the way that they shatter lives. And he wants to do something to prevent that from happening in the future.
Eventually, he agrees, and the US pays him $25,000 for his help. In November 2007, Snow reaches out to Bout to dangle the bait.
Snow tells Bout's people this concocted backstory that he recently flew a representative of a Colombian guerrilla group, and they're looking for a serious arms supplier. Given Snow's straight-laced reputation, this feels a little out of the blue.
Bout actually makes jokes that Snow's US phone number must be a direct line to the CIA. But Bout looks into the guy, doesn't see anything that gives him suspicion, and listen, the size of this deal is just a little too tempting for Bout to give up.
Snow's got Bout on the hook. Now the DEA needs to reel him in.
Snow puts Bout into contact with two supposed Colombian rebel commanders, but they're really just undercover DEA agents.
The agents and Snow tell Bout they need to meet him face to face at a location that they all feel is secure.
They suggest Romania, Ghana, Morocco, Montenegro, but they can't seem to find anywhere that Bout feels safe.
Then, as a last ditch, the agents suggest Thailand. It doesn't have an extradition treaty with the US, but the DEA believes that Thai authorities will agree to the deal.
Bout recognizes that Thailand is convenient, it's easy for him to get there, and he is operating under the misapprehension that the United States can't get to him in Thailand.
Bout gets on a plane. The trap is ready to be sprung, but the DEA doesn't just need their target in Thailand. To extradite him, they also need Boot to acknowledge he knows the weapons he's selling will be used on U.S. citizens.
In a private conference room at the Sofitel Hotel, Boot meets the two undercover agents. Now, they have bugged this entire room with hidden microphones. When the meeting begins, one of the undercover agents asks for dozens of Igla launchers.
Then the agent drops the line that could blow the whole thing apart. These missiles are to shoot down American pilots.
Everyone's hanging on his next words. Finally, he nods and says, "We have the same enemy."
Just like that, boom, it's the clincher. Proof Boot is conspiring to kill U.S. citizens. Doors burst open, agents rush in.
After a global hunt spanning nearly a decade, the Merchant of Death is caught. In 2011, Boot is convicted of conspiracy to kill U.S. nationals and provide material support to a terrorist organization. He's sentenced to 25 years. Meanwhile, Mike Snow vanishes, taking his heroic story with him.
Mike and his family flee Africa for a witness protection program, and for years, his story remains hidden.
Then, in 2014, journalist Nicholas Schmidl sits down repeatedly with Victor Boot and publishes a detailed expose. In it, he lays bare the incredible tale of Operation Relentless and how one Bush pilot helped bring down the world's biggest arms dealer. Victor Boot sheltered out of reach. Other fugitives hide in plain sight. For 3 years, locals in one Eastern European dive bar drink alongside a mystic healer called Dr. Dragan Dabic. What they don't know is he's really the most wanted warlord on the planet.
In the mid-90s, the newly formed nation of Bosnia and Herzegovina is being torn apart by civil war. The two biggest ethnic groups, mostly Muslim Bosniaks and mostly Christian Bosnian Serbs, are in a bitter fight for power.
Leading the Bosnian Serb forces is one of modern history's most brutal leaders, Radovan Karadzic.
Radovan Karadzic is a former psychiatrist who is now the political and military leader of the Bosnian Serbs, and he is truly an extreme nationalist.
During the war, he carries out a horrific genocide. He has Bosniak cities surrounded and starved, and carries out dozens of brutal mass killings.
When the war ends in 1995, the world cries out for justice. Karadzic is indicted for genocide by the UN. But at first, nothing happens at all.
For the first few months after the end of the conflict, Karadzic is living openly. But as time passes, he can sense a change.
Karadzic feels that local support is waning and that his arrest may be imminent. Sometime in 1997, Radovan Karadzic disappears.
To find him, NATO peacekeeping troops begin a huge manhunt, working closely with U.S. intelligence forces. American analysts comb tiny settlements along the border between Bosnia and Serbia.
They're looking for things like late-night internet logins in villages that don't normally have power, or even subscriptions to newspapers.
As pressure to enforce the UN indictment grows, so does the size of the manhunt. Soon, it's deploying teams of CIA officers, Delta Force, and even SEAL Team 6.
For 8 years, every lead comes up empty. But as investigators comb Eastern Europe, they miss one crucial development: the sudden appearance of a mystical healer in the neighboring country of Serbia.
In 2005, Dr. Dragan Dabic appears in the capital of Serbia, Belgrade, and he practices acupuncture and old traditional remedies. He's gentle. Kids on the street call him Santa Claus.
But this mystical healer is no saint. In fact, he's the world's most wanted warlord, Radovan Karadzic.
Weirdly, the disguise kind of adds up. Karadzic studied medicine when he was young, so he knows exactly how to be convincing as a healer.
You'd think he'd keep his head down, but that's not his style.
Pretty soon, he's built up enough of a profile that he ends up becoming the face of a US-based vitamin company and even writes a weekly column for a well-being magazine.
Then he gets even bolder.
He starts going to a local bar that's a haunt of Serbian nationalists, and at one point, the disguised Karadzic grabs a fiddle and plays a heroic Serbian ballad beneath a picture of himself.
By now, Karadzic believes he's truly untouchable. Then someone in his inner circle makes a mistake.
11 years after he first disappears, Karadzic gets a phone call from his brother. But his brother uses an old SIM card that investigators are still tracking.
Officers start looking into the man who picked up the phone. But soon they figure out he's not who he says he is at all.
This time, Karadzic has got nowhere to run. In July 2008, on a crowded city bus, one of history's worst war criminals is finally cornered.
He takes his seat on the bus, and two plainclothes agents take seats behind him. At that point, he knows that he's been caught.
In 2016, Karadzic is found guilty of genocide and war crimes and sentenced to 40 years in prison. That year, British war reporter Julian Borger uncovers the full story of how this historic moment happened.
Borger publishes an extraordinary tell-all account built from dozens of interviews with spies and officials.
These interviews reveal the details of how intense this chase had been and just how close Karadzic came to disappearing forever.